The stagecoach rattled into Lordsburg, New Mexico territory, on a scorching afternoon in July of 1878, and Olivia Fairchild stepped down onto the dusty street clutching two leather cases that held not clothing or keepsakes, but precision optical instruments worth more than most ranches in the territory. She had traveled 3,000 miles from Boston to marry a man she had never met, a cattle rancher named Thomas Henley, who had promised her a comfortable home and security in his letters, though he had mentioned nothing about whether he might appreciate a woman who spent her nights mapping the heavens instead of keeping a proper household. The telescopes were her dowry and her rebellion both, the only pieces of her former life she refused to abandon even as she left everything else behind. The driver handed down her trunk, eyeing the scientific cases with obvious curiosity, but Olivia offered no explanation. She had learned during the long journey west that most people found her passion for astronomy either amusing or inappropriate for a woman of 23 years, and she had grown weary of defending herself. "Miss Fairchild." A man approached, removing his hat to reveal thinning gray hair and a weathered face that belonged to someone considerably older than the photograph Thomas Henley had sent 6 months prior. "Yes, I am Olivia Fairchild," she replied, studying him with the same careful observation she applied to celestial objects. "Are you sent by Mr. Henley?" The man twisted his hat in his hands, his discomfort palpable in the afternoon heat. "I am Robert Walsh, Miss, foreman at the Henley Ranch." "I am afraid I have difficult news. Thomas passed on about 3 weeks ago, took a fever that turned to pneumonia. We buried him on the property next to his first wife." The words should have devastated her, but Olivia felt only a strange numbness followed by a creeping panic about her circumstances. She had sold everything she owned in Boston to make this journey, had severed ties with her disapproving family who considered her interest in science unnatural for a woman. She had precisely $17 in her reticule and no return ticket east. "I see," she managed, aware that several townspeople had paused their activities to observe this drama unfolding on their main street. "I suppose I should arrange passage back to Boston then." "Well, miss, the thing is," Walsh shifted his weight uncomfortably. Thomas had already paid for the marriage license and told half the territory about his bride coming from Boston. His brother Frank inherited the ranch, and Frank said to bring you out to the property either way. He said he would make things right by you, one way or another. Olivia felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the New Mexico sun. "I am not property to be passed from one brother to another, Mr. Walsh." "No, miss, nothing like that," Walsh said quickly, genuine distress crossing his features. "Frank is a good man, honest as they come. He just meant he would help you get settled however you saw fit, whether that is staying or going. The ranch is half a day's ride, and there is not another stage through here for 5 days anyway. You could at least rest up before deciding what comes next." She looked around Lordsburg, taking in the dusty street, the handful of rough buildings, the vast empty landscape stretching in all directions under a sky so blue and clear it made her astronomer's heart ache with possibility. She had nowhere else to go, no one waiting for her anywhere in the world. "Very well," she said finally. "I accept your employer's hospitality, at least temporarily." Walsh loaded her belongings into a sturdy wagon, handling the telescope cases with surprising care after she explained their fragility. They set out northeast from town, following a rutted road that gradually dissolved into mere tracks across the high desert terrain. Olivia had never seen such openness, such vast distances unmarred by the buildings and trees of the east. The landscape was harsh but possessed its own severe beauty, all red rock and scattered sage under that impossible sky. "What kind of ranch does Mr. Henley run?" she asked, breaking the silence that had stretched for miles. "Cattle mostly, some horses," Walsh replied, seemingly relieved to have neutral conversation. "Thomas built it up from nothing over 15 years. Started with land he bought cheap from a Mexican family heading back south after the war. Frank came out from Missouri about 8 years back to help run things. They were good partners, those two brothers. Frank took Thomas's death hard. They were close then, very close. Frank never married, said he was too busy helping build the ranch. Now it is all his, and I do not think he wanted it this way." They traveled through the afternoon, stopping once to water the horses at a small creek that seemed miraculous in the dry landscape. Olivia watched Walsh handle the animals with practiced efficiency, and she found herself wondering what kind of man this Frank Ashford might be. This brother who inherited an unwanted legacy and an unwanted bride in the same cruel stroke. The sun was lowering toward the western horizon when Walsh pointed ahead to a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley between low hills. "There it is. The Henley Ranch, though I suppose we will be calling it the Ashford Ranch now, given that was Frank's name before the brothers went into business together." As they drew closer, Olivia could make out a substantial ranch house built of adobe and wood, along with a large barn, several corrals, and various outbuildings that spoke of a prosperous operation. Cattle dotted the hillsides, and she counted at least a dozen horses in the nearest paddock. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, and Olivia felt her breath catch unexpectedly. He was tall and lean, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and strong features darkened by sun and wind. He wore work clothes dusty from labor, and he moved with an easy grace that suggested strength held in reserve. This was not what she had expected, though she could not have said exactly what she had expected. Frank Ashford approached the wagon, his blue eyes finding hers with an intensity that made her suddenly conscious of how bedraggled she must appear after 2 days of travel. "Miss Fairchild," he said, his voice deep and surprisingly gentle. "I am Frank Ashford. I am very sorry about the circumstances that brought you here." "Mr. Ashford," she replied, allowing him to help her down from the wagon. His hands were calloused, but his grip was careful, and he released her the moment her feet touched the ground. "I am sorry for your loss. Your brother and I never met, but his letters suggested he was a good man." Something flickered across Frank's face, grief perhaps, or guilt. "He was the best man I knew. Please come inside. You must be exhausted." He led her toward the house while Walsh began unloading her belongings. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, with good furniture and real glass windows that must have cost a fortune to transport this far from civilization. A Mexican woman appeared from what Olivia assumed was the kitchen, her round face creasing with sympathy. "Miss Fairchild, this is Senora Carmen Rodriguez," Frank said. "She keeps the house and cooks for us. Carmen, could you prepare the guest room and perhaps some supper?" "Of course, Senor Frank." Carmen's English was heavily accented but clear. "Welcome, Senorita. I am so sorry about Senor Thomas." "Thank you," Olivia murmured. Feeling overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers, Frank gestured toward a comfortable chair. "Please sit down. Would you like water? We have coffee, though I warn you Carmen makes it strong enough to strip paint." "Water would be lovely, thank you." Olivia sank into the chair, suddenly aware of how tired she truly was. The journey from Boston had taken 3 weeks, and she had slept poorly throughout, anxious about the future she was rushing toward. Now that future had shifted entirely, leaving her unmoored. Frank brought her a glass of cool water and then surprised her by pulling up a chair across from her, rather than maintaining a more formal distance. "I want you to know that you are welcome to stay here as long as you need," he said, his directness refreshing after so much uncertainty. "Thomas made a commitment to you, and even though he is gone, I feel responsible for honoring that commitment in whatever way I can." "That is very generous, but I cannot simply stay here indefinitely," Olivia said. "It would not be proper, and I have no desire to be a burden." "You would not be a burden. This is a big ranch and we can always use help. Can you keep books? We need someone to manage the accounts and records. Our last bookkeeper moved to Santa Fe 6 months ago, and I have been handling it myself, which means it is being done poorly." Olivia considered this. She had a good head for figures and had helped her father with his medical practice accounts before their estrangement. "I could do that, yes, but surely there must be someone local who could fill that position. Most folks around here who can read and write well enough have better opportunities than working on a ranch," Frank said. "And I trust you more than I would some stranger. You came all this way in good faith. That speaks to your character." "You do not know anything about my character," Olivia pointed out. "I could be anyone." A smile tugged at the corner of Frank's mouth, the first she had seen from him. "Thomas and I may not have always agreed on everything, but he was an excellent judge of people. He chose you from dozens of responses to his advertisement. I trust his judgment." Walsh appeared in the doorway carrying one of the telescope cases, huffing slightly from exertion. "Where do you want these, miss? They are heavier than they look." "Oh, please be careful," Olivia said, jumping up. "The mounting mechanisms are delicate." "Telescopes?" Frank's eyebrows rose. "You brought telescopes?" Olivia felt her chin lift defensively. "Yes, I am an astronomer. Well, not professionally, but I have been studying the night sky since I was 12 years old. I have published 3 papers in the Journal of the American Association for the Advancement of Science." She waited for the dismissive response she usually received, the amused condescension or outright mockery. Instead, Frank's expression shifted to something like wonder. "Published papers. That is remarkable. I have never met a woman scientist before. I have never met many scientists at all, to be honest." His genuine interest caught her off guard. Most people think it is peculiar for a woman to pursue such interests. "Most people have narrow minds," Frank said simply. "Where would you like to set up your equipment? The sky out here is clearer than anything you would find in Boston. Almost no light from towns or cities to interfere with your observations." Olivia stared at him, something warm and unexpected unfurling in her chest. "You understand about light pollution, I read," Frank said with a slight shrug. "There is not much else to do on winter nights out here besides read and repair tack. I came across an article about astronomy in Harper's Weekly a few years back. Found it fascinating." Walsh cleared his throat. "Still holding these cases, folks?" "I am sorry," Olivia said quickly. "Perhaps they could go in my room for now until I decide where best to set up." Over supper that evening, Carmen served a delicious meal of beef stew with fresh bread, and Olivia found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks. Frank proved to be easy company, telling her about the ranch operations and the surrounding territory without dominating the conversation. He asked intelligent questions about her work, her journey west, and her impressions of New Mexico. "It is so different from home," she admitted. "Everything is so open here, so vast. It feels like you can see forever." "Wait until you see the night sky," Frank said. "If you think the daytime views are impressive, you have not seen anything yet." After supper, as promised, Frank led her outside away from the house lights. The sun had set while they ate, and now the sky was emerging in all its glory. Olivia gasped audibly. She had seen dark skies before, had done observations from her uncle's farm in Vermont, but this was different. This was transcendent. The Milky Way stretched overhead like a river of diamonds, and stars filled every corner of the heavens in such profusion that familiar constellations became difficult to pick out from the surrounding multitude. "Oh my word," she breathed. "I have never seen anything like this." "Good sky tonight," Frank agreed, standing beside her with his hands in his pockets. "No moon yet and the air is clear. You picked a good night to arrive, despite everything else." They stood in companionable silence, and Olivia found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her, the warmth of him in the cooling night air. She had expected awkwardness or tension, but instead felt an odd sense of rightness, as though she had known this man longer than a few hours. "I was terrified when Mr. Walsh told me about Thomas," she admitted quietly. "I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. My family and I are estranged. They thought my scientific interests were shameful, that I was unmarriageable because I cared more about planets than parties. I suppose they were right in the end." "They were not right," Frank said firmly. "You should never have to make yourself smaller to fit someone else's expectations, and Thomas did not want you to change either. He told me once that he specifically sought a woman of education and unusual interests because he respected independence of mind." "Did he?" Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. "I wish I could have known him." "He would have liked you very much," Frank said softly. Then, after a pause, "I should let you rest. You have had a long journey and an even longer day. Carmen has prepared the guest room. If you need anything, just call out. My room is down the hall, and Carmen and her husband Pedro have the foreman's cottage behind the barn." "Thank you, Frank," Olivia said, then caught herself. "I am sorry, is it too familiar to use your given name? I would like it if you did," he replied. "Good night, Olivia." She watched him walk back toward the house, his figure silhouetted against the lamplight spilling from the windows, and felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition she was not quite ready to name. The next morning, Olivia woke to brilliant sunshine streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. She dressed quickly in one of her simpler calico dresses and found her way to the kitchen, where Carmen was cooking breakfast while humming a Spanish song. "Good morning, Senorita. Did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you. Can I help with anything?" Carmen looked pleased. "You could set the table if you like. Senor Frank and the men eat in the dining room, but you and I usually eat in the kitchen. Though maybe now that you are here, things will be different." "I am happy to eat in the kitchen," Olivia said quickly. "I do not want to impose on anyone's routines." "You are not imposing. Senor Frank specifically said you should eat with him." Carmen handed her plates and utensils. "He is a good man, that one. He took such good care of his brother when the fever came. Barely slept for a week, trying everything to bring the fever down. It broke his heart when Senor Thomas died." Olivia absorbed this information while setting the table. She was arranging the last fork when Frank entered, freshly washed with his dark hair still damp. "Good morning," he said, his face brightening when he saw her. "I hope you slept well." "Very well indeed. The quiet here is remarkable." "Wait until the coyotes start up," Frank said with a grin. "You might revise that opinion." They ate breakfast together, and Frank outlined his proposal for her position at the ranch. She would keep the books and records, handle correspondence, and manage the household accounts. In exchange, she would receive room and board plus a monthly salary of $30, which was generous by any standard. "I cannot pay you what a ranch foreman makes," Frank explained, "but I want you to have enough to save money, in case you decide eventually that you want to return east or start over somewhere else." "That is more than fair," Olivia said, surprised by his thoughtfulness. "When would you like me to start?" "Whenever you are ready. Today, tomorrow, next week. There is no rush. I would like to start today, Olivia decided. Keeping busy will help me adjust to everything. Frank showed her to the ranch office, a comfortable room with a large desk, filing cabinets, and shelves lined with ledgers and records. The desk faced a window that looked out over the valley, and Olivia could see the cattle grazing on the hillsides beyond. Everything is here, though I am afraid it is somewhat disorganized, Frank admitted, gesturing at the stacks of papers and receipts covering every surface. Thomas handled all this before he got sick, and I have been just trying to keep up since then. Olivia surveyed the chaos with the same analytical eye she applied to astronomical data. I will have this sorted out within a week. I believe you, Frank said, and the confidence in his voice warmed her. He left her to it, and Olivia lost herself in the work. It was immediately clear that Frank had been telling the truth about his bookkeeping skills. Receipts were misfiled, calculations contained errors, and the whole system lacked any coherent organization. But the ranch itself was clearly prosperous, and beneath the surface disorder, she found evidence of sound business decisions and careful management. She worked through the morning, breaking only when Carmen brought her lunch on a tray. By late afternoon, she had created a preliminary system and identified several outstanding debts that needed collection and several bills that needed immediate payment. Frank returned as the sun was lowering, dusty and tired from a day working with the cattle. "How did you fare?" he asked, pouring himself water from the pitcher Carmen had left. "You have people who owe you money," Olivia said, consulting her notes. "Quite a lot of money, actually, and you have suppliers who are likely wondering why they have not been paid." Frank winced. "I was afraid of that. I know I let things slip after Thomas died." "It is understandable under the circumstances," Olivia said gently, "but we should address it soon. May I draft letters to the debtors and send payments to the suppliers? Please do. I trust your judgment completely." Frank leaned against the doorframe, studying her with an expression she could not quite interpret. "You look happy." Olivia realized with some surprise that she was happy, or at least more content than she had been in months. "I enjoy this kind of work, creating order from chaos, solving problems. It is not so different from scientific work, really. Would you like to see the rest of the ranch tomorrow? I could show you around properly, introduce you to the hands." "I would like that very much." That night after supper, Olivia set up her smaller telescope on a flat area behind the house that Frank helped her identify as having the clearest view of the sky in all directions. The telescope was a fine brass refractor she had saved for years to purchase, and she handled it with the care of a mother with a newborn. Frank watched with obvious interest as she aligned and calibrated the instrument. "What will you look at tonight?" "Saturn should be visible in a few hours, and I want to observe the Andromeda Nebula. I am tracking its position over time to see if I can detect any motion." "Can I look?" Frank asked, almost shyly. Olivia felt that warm sensation in her chest again. "Of course. In fact, let me show you how to locate objects using the coordinates." She spent the next hour teaching Frank the basics of astronomical observation, and he proved an apt student, asking intelligent questions and showing genuine fascination with everything she explained. When Saturn rose high enough to view clearly, she positioned the telescope and stepped back to let him look. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. "Oh my God," he breathed, his eye pressed to the eyepiece. "The rings! You can actually see the rings. Beautiful, is it not?" Olivia said, unable to keep the smile from her voice. "Incredible. And this is just out there every night whether anyone is looking at it or not." "That is what makes it so wonderful," Olivia agreed. "The universe does not care if we observe it. It simply exists, vast and magnificent." Frank straightened from the telescope, and in the starlight his expression was full of wonder. "Thank you for sharing this with me. I feel like I just saw something that changed everything." "That is exactly how I felt the first time I looked through a telescope," Olivia said softly. "I was 12 years old, and my uncle let me use his small refractor. I saw the moon's craters and realized that everything I had been taught about the heavens was just the beginning. There was so much more to discover." They observed together for hours, until the chill night air drove them inside. Olivia felt lighter than she had in years, and as she prepared for bed, she realized that despite the strange circumstances that had brought her to New Mexico, she did not regret being here. Not at all. The next weeks fell into a comfortable pattern. Olivia spent her mornings and early afternoons working on the ranch accounts, which slowly transformed from chaos into a model of organization. She spent her late afternoons exploring the ranch with Frank, learning about cattle and horses and the harsh realities of making a living from this unforgiving land. Frank was a patient teacher, explaining everything with the same genuine interest he showed in her astronomical work. She learned to recognize the different breeds of cattle, to spot signs of illness or injury in the herd, to read the landscape for water and good grazing. He taught her to ride, sitting patiently while she struggled with the mechanics of controlling 1,000 pounds of horse. "You are thinking too hard," he told her one afternoon as she tensed in the saddle. "Stop trying to dominate the horse. You are not enemies. You are partners." Olivia forced herself to relax, and miraculously the horse responded, moving smoothly beneath her instead of fighting every command. "There, see," Frank's smile was brilliant. "You are a natural." "Hardly," Olivia laughed, but she felt absurdly pleased by his praise. In the evenings, weather permitting, they observed the stars together. Frank became genuinely proficient at using the telescope, and Olivia found herself looking forward to these sessions as much for his company as for the observations themselves. They talked about everything during those long nights under the stars. Frank told her about growing up in Missouri, about coming west to help his older brother build a dream, about the loneliness he sometimes felt despite being surrounded by people and animals. Olivia shared her own stories about her strict upbringing in Boston, her progressive parents who nonetheless struggled to accept a daughter who preferred laboratories to parlors, about the isolation of being different in a society that valued conformity above all else. "I never fit anywhere," she admitted one night as they watched for meteors. "Too educated for most men, too unconventional for proper society. My family thought I would die a spinster, and honestly, I had accepted that fate. Marriage seemed impossible unless I was willing to pretend to be someone I was not." "Thomas would not have asked you to pretend," Frank said quietly. "And neither would I." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Olivia's heart raced, but before she could respond, a brilliant meteor streaked across the sky, and the moment passed. Nearly 6 weeks after her arrival, a letter came from Boston. Olivia recognized her mother's handwriting and felt her stomach clench. She had written to inform her parents of Thomas's death and her decision to stay at the ranch temporarily, but she had expected no response. The letter was brief and cold. Her father had died of a heart attack 3 weeks earlier. The funeral had already taken place. Her mother was selling the house and moving in with Olivia's married sister. There was no inheritance for Olivia, as her father had written her out of his will years ago due to her shameful behavior and refusal to accept a proper woman's role. Olivia read the letter 3 times, standing in the ranch office with tears streaming down her face. The grief came in waves, not just for her father's death, but for the relationship they had never managed to repair, for the love that had been conditional on her being someone she could not be. Frank found her there an hour later, still clutching the letter, her face blotched and swollen from crying. He did not ask permission, simply pulled her into his arms and held her while she sobbed into his shirt. "He is gone," she choked out. "My father is gone, and I never got to say goodbye. I never got to make him understand." "I am so sorry," Frank murmured, his hand gentle on her hair. "I am so very sorry." She clung to him, drawing comfort from his solid warmth, his strength. When the tears finally subsided, she pulled back, embarrassed by her loss of control. "I apologize. That was inappropriate." "You just lost your father," Frank said firmly. "You are allowed to grieve. He did not want me as a daughter. He wrote me out of his will." "Then he was a fool," Frank said fiercely. "You are brilliant and brave and extraordinary. Any father should be proud to claim you." Olivia looked up at him, at the anger in his eyes that was all on her behalf, and felt something click into place in her heart. She loved him. Somehow, without meaning to, without planning it, she had fallen completely in love with Frank Ashford. The realization should have terrified her, but instead it felt right, as inevitable as the stars wheeling overhead each night. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for taking me in, for being kind, for seeing me as I am." "Olivia," Frank said, his voice rough. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away the last of her tears. "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I am falling in love with you. Maybe I already have fallen in love with you. I have been trying to fight it, telling myself it is too soon, too complicated, that you deserve time to grieve and adjust to your new life. But watching you cry and not being able to take away your pain, I realized I cannot keep pretending I do not feel this way." Olivia's breath caught. "Frank, you do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "I know you came here to marry my brother. I know this is not what you expected or planned. I just needed you to know how I feel." "No, let me speak," Olivia said, finding her courage. "I am falling in love with you too. I think I have been since that first night when you looked through my telescope and understood why it mattered. You see me, all of me, and you do not want me to be anyone different. I have never had that before." Frank's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Really?" "Really," Olivia confirmed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and questioning. She answered by kissing him back, pouring into it all the loneliness and longing of her 23 years, all the hope she was only beginning to let herself feel. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Frank rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, I know people will talk, but I do not care. Marry me and stay here, build a life with me." "Yes," Olivia said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 3 weeks later in Lordsburg, with Carmen and Pedro and the ranch hands as witnesses. Olivia wore a simple blue dress that Carmen had helped her sew, and Frank wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed for the occasion. The circuit judge who performed the ceremony seemed mildly surprised by the bride's insistence on keeping her own surname professionally for her scientific work, but he made no objection. The wedding night was tender and sweet, Frank patient with Olivia's inexperience, both of them laughing and learning together. Afterwards, they lay tangled in each other's arms, and Olivia felt a peace she had never known. "I want to show you something," Frank said, rising from the bed and pulling on his pants. "Get dressed and come with me." Intrigued, Olivia dressed and followed him outside into the clear November night. He led her to the hill behind the house, to the spot where she usually set up her telescope. But tonight, something new stood there. A building, small but sturdy, with a domed roof and a door facing south. "What is this?" Olivia asked, confused. "An observatory," Frank said proudly. "I have been building it for the past 2 weeks with Pedro's help. The roof rolls back on tracks so you can observe in any direction. There is space inside for both your telescopes and a desk for your notes. It is not fancy, but it is yours." Olivia felt tears well up again, but these were tears of joy. "You built me an observatory." "You are my wife now," Frank said simply. "Your dreams are my dreams. Your work matters. I want you to have a proper space to pursue it." She kissed him fiercely, trying to convey through touch what she could not find words for. This man, this wonderful man, understood her in ways no one ever had. They christened the observatory that night, making love on the floor beneath the wheeling stars, and Olivia thought she had never been happier in her entire life. The winter was mild by New Mexico standards, and Olivia thrived in her new life. She spent her mornings on ranch business, which now ran with efficient precision, her afternoons helping with various tasks around the property, and her nights either in bed with her husband or in her observatory, often with Frank by her side. She submitted a paper on her observations of the Andromeda Nebula to the Journal of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and in March received word that it had been accepted for publication. Frank insisted they ride into Lordsburg to celebrate, and he bought her a bottle of champagne that had probably taken 6 months to travel from California. "To my brilliant wife," he toasted in their bedroom that night, "who is going to be famous someday." "I doubt that," Olivia laughed, sipping the champagne, "but I am glad my work is valued by someone besides just me." "I value everything about you," Frank said seriously. "Your mind, your passion, your kindness, the way you laugh when you are surprised, the way you talk to the horses like they are people, the way you look at the stars like they are old friends." "You are going to make me cry again," Olivia warned, her voice thick with emotion. "Good tears this time, I hope." "The very best tears," she confirmed. In April, Olivia realized her monthly courses had not come. She said nothing at first, waiting to be certain, but when another month passed with no sign, she could no longer deny the truth. She was pregnant. She told Frank on a warm evening in May, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "I have news," she said, her heart pounding. They had not discussed children, and she had no idea how he would react. "What kind of news?" Frank asked, setting down the ledger he had been reviewing. "The kind that means we will need to add a cradle to the house in about 6 months." For a moment Frank just stared at her, processing her words. Then his face split into the widest smile she had ever seen. "You are pregnant." "We are having a baby. We are having a baby," Olivia confirmed, and suddenly she was in his arms, being spun in circles while he laughed with pure joy. "This is incredible," he said, setting her down but keeping his hands on her waist. "You are incredible. We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Olivia asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy, Olivia, I am the happiest man in the territory, maybe the whole country." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "When? November, I think, maybe early December." "We have so much to do," Frank said, his mind already racing ahead. "We need to fix up one of the spare rooms, get proper baby furniture, find a midwife. Carmen will know who is best." "We have time," Olivia said, amused by his sudden anxious energy. "But yes, Carmen will help. She has already guessed, I think. She keeps making me drink special teas and insisting I rest more." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Olivia continued her work through the summer, though she tired more easily and Frank fussed over her constantly. The baby was active, kicking vigorously whenever she sat still for too long, and Frank loved to place his hand on her swelling belly and feel the movement. "Strong child," he said proudly. "Takes after the mother, or the father," Olivia countered. "You are not exactly weak." They argued playfully about names, though nothing seemed quite right. Olivia wanted something meaningful, and Frank wanted something strong but not pretentious. In late October, as Olivia was entering her final weeks of pregnancy, a letter arrived that changed everything. It was from the Journal of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, informing her that her work on the Andromeda Nebula had attracted significant attention. The Harvard College Observatory was offering her a position as a research associate, the first woman they had ever extended such an offer to. The position would require her to relocate to Cambridge for at least part of each year. Olivia read the letter with shaking hands, torn between elation and despair. This was everything she had ever dreamed of professionally: recognition from the most prestigious observatory in the country, the chance to work with the finest astronomical instruments available, to be part of the scientific community in a real, official capacity. But it would mean leaving Frank, leaving the ranch, at least for months at a time. It would mean uprooting their life together just as they were starting their family. She showed Frank the letter that evening, watching his face carefully as he read. His expression was difficult to interpret, cycling through surprise, pride, and something that might have been sadness. "This is a remarkable honor," he said finally, handing the letter back. "They must think very highly of your work." "Yes," Olivia agreed quietly, "but I cannot accept it." "Why not?" "Because my life is here now. With you, with our baby. I cannot abandon you to spend half the year in Massachusetts." Frank was silent for a long moment, staring out the window at the darkening sky. "Do you want to accept it?" he asked finally. "If there were no obstacles, no complications, would you want this position?" Olivia swallowed hard. "Part of me would. The part that has dreamed of being a real scientist since I was a child. But I want this life more. I want you more. I will not sacrifice our marriage for professional advancement." "What if you did not have to choose?" Frank said slowly. "What if we could find a way to make both work?" "How?" "The ranch cannot run itself, and you cannot leave for months at a time. Walsh is a good foreman. With your systems in place and regular correspondence, he could manage the day-to-day operations. I could join you in Cambridge. We could spend 6 months there, 6 months here. Split our time." Olivia stared at him. "You would do that? Leave your ranch, your home, to follow me to Massachusetts? You left everything you knew to come here," Frank pointed out. "You took a chance on an unknown future because you were brave enough to believe it could be better than what you left behind." "I can be brave too, and it is not like we would be abandoning the ranch. We would be expanding our lives, not leaving this one behind. But you love it here, this land, this work." "I love you more," Frank said simply. "And I want our child to see that both parents' dreams matter equally. That women can be scientists and wives and mothers all at once. That love means supporting each other's ambitions, not forcing anyone to choose." Olivia felt tears streaming down her face again. "Are you absolutely certain? This would be a huge change." "I am certain," Frank said, pulling her close. "Write to them. Accept the position. We will figure out the details." The baby arrived on a cold night in late November after 12 hours of labor that left Olivia exhausted but exhilarated. Frank stayed by her side the entire time, despite Carmen's insistence that men should wait elsewhere during births. When the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in Olivia's arms, Frank's face was wet with tears. "A son," the midwife announced. "A healthy, strong son." "Hello, little one," Olivia whispered, examining the tiny, perfect features. The baby had Frank's dark hair and what she suspected would be his blue eyes. "Welcome to the world. What should we name him?" Frank asked, gently touching one tiny fist. Olivia had been thinking about this for weeks. "What about Thomas? After your brother, he brought us together in a way." Frank's face crumpled with emotion. "Thomas Frank Ashford. He would have loved that." "Thomas Frank Ashford it is," Olivia agreed. baby Thomas was a relatively easy infant, sleeping well and nursing eagerly. Olivia had worried about how she would balance motherhood with her work, but she found that the activities complemented each other naturally. She could work on calculations while Thomas napped, write up observations in the early mornings when he was content to lie in his cradle and watch the sunrise, make notes one-handed while nursing him in the observatory. Frank was a devoted father, changing nappies without complaint, walking the floor with Thomas during fussy evenings, singing to him in a surprisingly pleasant voice. Olivia fell in love with her husband all over again watching him with their son. In January, they received confirmation from Harvard that they could begin their position in the fall, with the understanding that they would split their time between Cambridge and New Mexico. The arrangement was unusual, but the observatory was willing to accommodate it given the quality of Olivia's work. "We are really doing this," Olivia said one evening as they made plans. Thomas was asleep in his cradle, and they were discussing logistics of the move. "We are really doing this," Frank confirmed. "It will be an adventure." "You are not worried, terrified," Frank admitted. "I have never lived in a city. I have never been anywhere more cosmopolitan than Santa Fe, but I am more excited than scared. I want to see your world, meet your colleagues, watch you work with the best instruments available. And you are sure Walsh can manage the ranch?" "Positive. He has been running things largely on his own for months now anyway, with your systems making everything easier. Pedro will stay on as foreman. Carmen will keep the house. We will be back every spring for calving season. It will work." They traveled to Cambridge in September, when Thomas was 10 months old and beginning to pull himself up on furniture. The journey east was long and tiring with a baby, but Thomas charmed everyone they encountered, gurgling and smiling at strangers. Cambridge was overwhelming after the open spaces of New Mexico. So many people, so much noise and activity. But the Harvard College Observatory was everything Olivia had dreamed of. They gave her an office, access to their telescopes, and treated her with professional respect, despite her gender. Frank adapted surprisingly well to city life. He made friends with other faculty spouses, took long walks with Thomas in his perambulator, and became a regular at the Harvard Library, where he read voraciously on astronomy, philosophy, and current events. He attended Olivia's lectures and presentations, asking intelligent questions and beaming with pride whenever she presented her findings. At night, when they were alone in their rented townhouse, he would hold her close and whisper, "I am so proud of you, you know that? So incredibly proud." But both of them breathed easier when spring came and they boarded the train back to New Mexico. The ranch welcomed them like an old friend, and Olivia realized she had missed the vast open skies and the silence broken only by wind and cattle. "Home," Frank sighed as the ranch house came into view. "Both places are home now," Olivia said. "Cambridge for my work, New Mexico for my soul." They fell into a rhythm over the next years, fall and winter in Cambridge, spring and summer in New Mexico. Thomas grew up knowing both worlds, equally comfortable in Harvard lecture halls and on horseback chasing cattle. He showed early aptitude for both science and ranching, asking endless questions about stars and cows with equal enthusiasm. When Thomas was 3, Olivia discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, with persistent nausea and fatigue, but she continued her work, determined not to let motherhood limit her contributions to science. Their daughter arrived in June, born at the ranch with the same midwife who had delivered Thomas. They named her Clara, after Olivia's grandmother, who had encouraged her childhood interest in science. Clara was different from Thomas from the start, quieter and more observant, with Frank's blue eyes and Olivia's auburn hair. She seemed to study everything around her with serious intensity, and Frank joked that they had produced a natural scientist. With 2 children, the cross-country journeys became more complicated but also more joyful. Thomas took charge of entertaining his baby sister during the long train rides, and they became inseparable companions. Olivia's career flourished. She published regularly, made significant contributions to the understanding of nebulae and variable stars, and became a respected voice in astronomical circles, despite the prejudice against women in science. Frank supported her completely, never once suggesting she should focus more on home and less on work. "You are changing the world," he told her when she expressed guilt about time away from the children. "Thomas and Clara are learning that women can be anything they want to be. That is a gift you are giving them." When Thomas was 7 and Clara 4, the ranch had its most profitable year ever, thanks to new breeding programs Frank had implemented and market connections Olivia had helped establish during their Cambridge winters. They celebrated by adding a larger telescope to Olivia's observatory, a refractor powerful enough to compete with anything Harvard had. "Now I can do my best work at home," Olivia said, examining the beautiful instrument. "Our home," Frank corrected gently. "This will always be our home, no matter how many months we spend elsewhere." That summer, they received word that Olivia had been elected to the American Association for the Advancement of Science, only the 3rd woman ever to receive that honor. The ceremony would take place in Boston in October. The whole family traveled east for the occasion, staying with colleagues who had become dear friends over the years. Thomas was allowed to attend the ceremony, sitting beside Frank in the front row, and Olivia would never forget the sight of her husband and son watching with identical expressions of pride as she accepted the honor. In her acceptance speech, she deviated from her prepared remarks. "I stand here today not just as a scientist, but as a wife and mother, as a woman who was told repeatedly that I would have to choose between my passion for discovery and a conventional life. I am grateful beyond measure to my husband, Frank Ashford, who has shown me every day that love means supporting each other's dreams without reservation. And to my children, Thomas and Clara, who have taught me that the greatest discoveries are not just in the heavens but in the daily miracle of family." There was not a dry eye in the audience, and afterwards dozens of women approached to thank her for her words, for proving it was possible to have both career and family. As the years passed, the pattern of their lives remained constant but never monotonous. Each fall they headed east, where Olivia continued her research and Frank immersed himself in the intellectual life of Cambridge. Each spring they returned to New Mexico, where the ranch prospered and the children ran wild across the open land. Thomas grew into a tall, serious young man who shared his father's love of ranching and his mother's scientific mind. He announced his intention to study veterinary science, wanting to combine both his interests. Clara, quieter but equally determined, showed an early aptitude for mathematics and declared at age 10 that she would be an astronomer like her mother. "The observatory will be yours someday," Olivia told her, watching her daughter carefully chart the positions of stars. "You will make discoveries that will astound the world." "Did you always know you would be a scientist?" Clara asked. "I always knew I loved the stars," Olivia said, "but I did not always know I could make it my life's work. I thought I would have to give it up when I married." "Your father changed everything by believing in me." "Papa says you saved him too," Clara said. "He says he was just going through the motions before you came, that you showed him what it meant to really live." Olivia felt her eyes mist. "We saved each other. That is what love should be." When Thomas turned 18, He enrolled at the agricultural college in Las Cruces, specializing in animal husbandry and veterinary medicine. The house felt empty without him, but he came home every summer to work on the ranch and practice his new skills. Clara, at 15, was already corresponding with astronomers around the world about her observations. She had discovered a variable star that summer, and Olivia had submitted the finding in her daughter's name. The paper's acceptance letter arrived in September, and Clara screamed with joy. "I am a published scientist," she announced, waving the letter. "Just like you, Mama. Better than me," Olivia corrected fondly. "Your first publication came years earlier than mine." Frank gathered them both into his arms. "My brilliant wife and brilliant daughter, how did I get so lucky?" On their 20th wedding anniversary, Frank surprised Olivia with a trip to just the two of them, leaving the children with Carmen and Pedro. They traveled south to Mexico, visiting ancient ruins and observing the night sky from new latitudes. On their last evening, they climbed a pyramid at sunset and watched the stars emerge over the jungle canopy. "You ever regret it?" Frank asked, his arm around her waist. "Coming west, marrying me instead of pursuing your career single-mindedly?" "Never," Olivia said firmly. "I have both because of you. Career and family, science and love, you never made me choose." "Because there should not have been a choice," Frank said. "You are all of those things. Scientist, wife, mother, observer of stars, they are all you, and I love every part." "I was so scared that day in Lordsburg," Olivia admitted. "When Walsh told me Thomas had died and I was stranded in this strange place, I thought my life was over before it had really begun." "Instead, it was just beginning," Frank said softly, "for both of us." They kissed as the stars wheeled overhead, the same stars Olivia had studied for decades, the same stars that had brought them together in the first place. Thomas graduated from agricultural college with top honors and returned to the ranch to work alongside his father and Walsh, bringing new techniques and modern understanding to the operation. Within 2 years, the ranch was producing some of the finest cattle in the territory. Clara, at 18, enrolled at Harvard as Olivia had, one of only a handful of women in the astronomy program. But unlike her mother's generation, Clara found a more welcoming environment, thanks in part to the trails Olivia and other pioneering women had blazed. Olivia continued her research well into her 50s, making significant contributions to the understanding of stellar evolution. She published 2 books summarizing her life's work, both of which became standard references in the field. Frank remained her constant companion and supporter, attending conferences with her, helping with calculations, managing their dual household with the same careful attention he applied to the ranch. He learned to use the telescopes almost as well as she did, and several of her papers included acknowledgments of his assistance. When Olivia was 55, the Harvard College Observatory offered her a permanent position as senior research associate with no requirement to teach. It was an unprecedented honor for a woman of her generation, and it would have meant relocating to Cambridge full-time. She discussed it with Frank over several long evenings in their observatory. "You should take it," he said finally. "This is what you have worked toward your whole career." "But the ranch," Olivia protested. "Our life here. Thomas can run the ranch now. He knows it better than I do at this point, and we would still come back to visit. But Olivia, they are offering you everything you deserve. You should not turn it down." "What about what you deserve?" Olivia challenged. "You have spent 25 years supporting my dreams. When do you get to have what you want?" "I have what I want," Frank said simply. "You, healthy and happy and doing work you love, our children grown and thriving, a life rich with meaning and discovery. What more could I possibly want?" In the end, Olivia declined the Harvard position. Not because Frank asked her to, but because she realized that what she truly wanted was the life they had built together. The balance of science and ranch, city and desert, discovery and home. "I have made my contributions," she told the observatory director in her letter. "Now I want to spend more time training the next generation, including my daughter, and I want to grow old with my husband in the place we built together." They spent their later years mostly at the ranch, with occasional trips to Cambridge for conferences or to visit Clara, who had taken a position at the Harvard Observatory herself. Thomas married a sweet-natured woman named Elizabeth from Las Cruces, and they gave Olivia and Frank 4 grandchildren who filled the ranch house with laughter. On clear nights, Olivia and Frank still climbed the hill to the observatory, moving slower now but with the same sense of wonder. They would sit together, his arm around her shoulders, and watch the stars they had observed together for decades. "You remember the first night I showed you Saturn?" Olivia asked one evening when they were both in their 60s. "I remember everything about those early days," Frank said. "I remember thinking you were the most extraordinary person I had ever met. I remember being terrified you would leave. I remember being terrified you would ask me to be less than I was," Olivia admitted. "So many men would have. Then they would have missed out on the real you. And the real you is magnificent." They had 37 years together before Frank's heart finally gave out one spring morning as he was riding out to check on the herd. He died as he had lived, doing work he loved in the place he loved most. Olivia was 72 and felt as though half her soul had been ripped away, but she did not break. Frank had taught her too well about resilience and hope. At the funeral, attended by what seemed like half of New Mexico territory, she stood beside Thomas and Clara and spoke about the man who had changed her life. "Frank Ashford gave me the greatest gift one person can give another," she said, her voice steady despite her grief. "He saw who I truly was and loved all of it. He never asked me to be smaller or quieter or more conventional. He celebrated my strangeness and supported my dreams as though they were his own. Because of him, I got to be a scientist and a wife and a mother. I got to live fully in all the ways I needed to live. That is love. That is the legacy he leaves." She lived another 8 years, continuing her observations and her writing, mentoring young astronomers who came to study with the famous Olivia Fairchild Ashford. Clara took over more of the research, but Olivia remained active and engaged until the end. On a clear November night, 79 years old, and surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, Olivia Ashford took her last breath while looking through her telescope at the Andromeda Nebula she had studied for over 50 years. They buried her next to Frank on the hill above the ranch with a headstone that read simply, "Olivia Fairchild Ashford, astronomer, wife, mother. She brought telescopes to the Wild West and found her universe here." Years later, Clara would write in the introduction to her mother's collected works, "My mother always said she came to New Mexico to marry a stranger and ended up finding herself. She brought telescopes to study the heavens and found that her greatest discoveries were here on Earth. In my father, she found a partner who understood that love means celebrating each other's gifts, not diminishing them. Together they proved that a woman could reach for the stars without giving up the earth. That we can have it all if we are brave enough to demand it and lucky enough to find someone who supports us in the reaching. That is their legacy, and it continues in everyone who refuses to choose between their passions and their hearts." The observatory still stood on the hill, maintained by the family and used by astronomers from around the world. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas and his children. And on clear nights, if you stood in just the right spot, You could almost see two figures silhouetted against the stars, arms around each other, gazing upward together toward the infinite.